There's a copycat crime that is going on in the UFC, and I think it stems from the fact that Conor McGregor was watched by many of the young fighters 7 years ago today. Dricus du Plessis goes after Sean Strickland's dad. It's not our own judgment to really say one way or the other if he was right or wrong to do that, because different people and different values are going to have differing opinions on the matter at hand. So you also got to understand, a lot of this trash talking stuff came from the Conor McGregor and the Chael Sonnen era. Prior to that, everything was all about martial arts and things of that nature. They even tried to fine Miguel Torres and Forrest Griffin back in the day for having a little bit of an internet scuffle, having a few words with each other on social media, and all of a sudden the UFC wants to clamp down on a WEC fighter, a light heavyweight former champion UFC fighter in Forrest Griffin, and they decide they were going to go and fine them. Now we're far removed from that, because MMA in general, the UFC, is now a mainstream sport. And because of that, they will allow certain things just to get a promotion, just to get our attention, just to also show the world that, you know what, we are a sport that is respectable, but we are also a circus at the same time. And that is the era where the UFC is at in the current moment that you see. The copycat crimes. It's been the same thing all over again and again. Guys throwing bottles at each other. Conor throwing a dolly. Stirring up religious tensions in order to somehow make a fight. And not only make a fight, also make the fight really lucrative. Give all the eyes in the world a compelling story as to why you're going to watch. In Conor's case, it was because he stirred up religious tension with Khabib. In Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland's case, it's because Dricus du Plessis started talking about Sean Strickland's dad, to which he had this cognitive response based on his trauma, and was like, you know what? He is the sworn enemy at this point. And it just triggers guys differently. There are certain things that will trigger certain people. For example, I've gotten into altercations with people on the streets based on religion. One guy going at me saying that, well, if you're not pure Arab, you're not a real Muslim. And of course, I had something to say about that, because guess what? Those are some of the things that would trigger me. If you really want to put it in perspective, this is what triggers Sean Strickland, you talking about his dad. To some guys, it's different. Some guys may get mad if you call them the G word for one way or another. They could get mad and be like, oh, why would you say that? And some guys would be like, well, I know I'm not, so what do I care? But there are guys that would really be triggered if you called them a certain particular name. So, again, that's one of the things that we have to understand here in the sport of MMA, is that everybody is trying to trigger someone. Colby going at Leon based on his dad. And not only that, even forcing Leon Edwards himself to cry in the process, which really surprised me. But then he kept his composure. Like I've mentioned before, he talked to George St. Pierre, and he decided he was going to fight a technical matchup. In the words of Tom Aspinall, in what he just said in the True Geordie podcast, he said, mate, I'm in there, I'm just playing tag. I'm here to hit you, and I'm here to not get hit, and that's the game. And he sees it from a very pragmatic, stoic point of view. He doesn't need to wild up his warrior spirit. He doesn't need to go in a screaming tantrum to make himself feel better. He just does his job. He's here to do what he does on a normal basis, on a sparring session, on a bag work, pad hitting day. That's it. That's the way that he sees the sport. So it's very simple as that. He doesn't overcomplicate things, and that's how Leon went in there. Now, understand, there is a Conor McGregor effect that is going on in the industry. And the reason for that, you could kind of sum that up in the similarities that you see with the Vince Carter effect. If you guys ever seen that documentary, it talks about his impact on Canadian basketball, for example. Conor McGregor, not only did he affect Irish MMA based on the work of John Kavanagh and what he does with the amateur rankings and the amateur sanctioning bodies that John Kavanagh has worked at. Not only that, they've also had some legitimate pros on their side as well over the years. Obviously, James Gallagher comes to mind, Ward, Peter Queally, Paddy Houlihan, Isley, and just to name a few, Cian Cowell. A lot of these Irish guys are coming out of SBG Ireland. Okay, he's produced many of those guys. So that is the remarkable work of Conor McGregor in his gym. Now, overall, what is Conor McGregor's contribution to the sport? In all honesty, what he contributes to the sport is pure trash. And that's just me really objectively saying it. I'm not saying that he's trash. I would never say such a thing about a man who's accomplished many things that he has. And you have to give him credit for that. But you have to make no mistake that he is associated and anonymous with the idea of trashy things in MMA. And if you are associated with that, well, you reap what you sow. This is how you promote your fights. Great, it garners a lot of attention. But guess what? This is the backlash and the abrasive words that's going to describe your actions in the most objectionable way. So that is what he's associated with. He has now affected a sport into a copycat crime situation where now guys will take physical violence outside of the circumference of competition, and then not only that, perhaps maybe say things that are way beyond religion, race, tribalism, and everything in between that divides the humankind. So this is the reality and the legacy of Conor McGregor, not taking away from his double championship accomplishments. And that is the most fair way to really understand it. So now fast forward to today. You look at all the new guys, all the things that they say, not only that, the actions that they do, because make no mistake, Sean Strickland really pushes the boundaries in terms of how he presents himself, how he insults people in a certain way that he may find as just tongue-in-cheek. But the reality of Sean Strickland is no different than what Dricus is doing, but even more surprising to Dricus's demeanor. Now, why would he do something like that? Is it maybe because now that they started with MMA Guru, that perhaps maybe they become accustomed to this idea of, let's say, becoming a lot more abrasive, a lot more talkative. Not only talkative, but really in a trash talking sense of getting your opponents wild up, trying to get a response in order to just sell pay-per-views. Now, here's the interesting thing about this, right? Colby is the quintessential product of that years that Conor McGregor was on top while Colby Covington was fighting his way up in the prelims. And looking up to somebody like Conor McGregor, you think to yourself, you know what? I'm on the verge of getting cut. I'm a boring wrestler. I take guys down. I don't knock anybody out, but I get the job done. They're not going to renew my contract. I'm going to end up fighting in Bellator or the PFL or 1FC or whatever what was active during that time. And Colby had to go do something, so he had to go turn it up. And guess what? In MMA content creation, you also have to do the same thing. That's just this culture of MMA that you are at in the current moment of time, which propels me in a way to say things in a bold manner, such as saying that Conor McGregor is associated with trash. Because guess what? Everything that is wrong with the sport in terms of trash talking, in terms of not looking at it from a martial arts value point of system, guess what? You're going to view it as trash. But at the same time, I'm not going to act like I don't love it. I'm not going to act like I don't like entertainment as much as the next guy. I'm not going to act like I'm not going to be even more entertained by this and use the prospect of getting more views based on a controversial fight, such as what I did for the Tank Davis and the Ryan Garcia fight. Not only did I talk about Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis in their technical form and the breakdown, but also went into the sociological sense of how these men were mentally coming into this fight. The temperament of the likes of, let's say, Gervonta Davis, as opposed to Ryan Garcia. And even to this day, yes, it may not be the most views in the bigger channels, but in the smaller ones, I'm getting close to 8K on now. And the reason being is because, for one, let's just be honest, it was because of the fact that there's a lot of different breakdowns that I used with the sociological sense and the breakdowns of the fights and how they relate to each other in relationship to the result of the matchup. And that's what you have. I urge you guys to check out the Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis breakdown. Go on the video section, go on the popular side, and you will see that that is a current video at the current moment of time. But going back to the copycat crimes that are going on in MMA, you have to understand that when you see somebody that is as successful as Conor McGregor, he is the blueprint to what everybody has to do in order to promote themselves. Now, what about Khabib? Well, guess what? One thing that you can take out of Khabib is understand that their game plan and their camps that they do to get ready for fights are the best there is. Now, why is that? Because they leave no stone unturned. They wake up at a very early pace in order for them to train, and they have a great recovery system. Not only that, they have a system in their fighting technique that encourages winning points and dominating positions at all times, which lends itself to being successful at mixed martial arts. However, in all honesty, if you want me to be very objective as a journalist, and not only as that, but as somebody that has competed in a sport and understands the training that goes into what it takes to go into a camp, I gotta tell you that that is important as well. That is important, but Conor McGregor, in the way that he promotes himself, is unfortunately the correct way to do business in this particular sport. And there's no way around it. This is how you're going to attract fans. Now, how are you going to attract hardcore fans at the first light of it all? Well, you just got to go out and win fights. You win fights, you look good, you have your own style, you have a great style that's watchable, you can become a fan favorite to the hardcores. But then once you get to that point, you got to go out and turn up your personality. And this is where you promote yourself. And unfortunately, a lot of the guys that are on the top right now, whether that's Ufc'S, whether that's Sean Strickland, whether that's Manil Cap, and maybe even a little bit of Muhammad Makayev, they understand that this is what you have to do to hype yourself up. But at the same time, it's also very good to have the likes of Pantoja, who's a quiet warrior, that just does his work and wins fights and looks impressive doing it, dominant at that. Leon Edwards, the same thing. Quiet guy, does his work. Had one of the biggest emotional tests of his life during this past weekend. And you got to think to yourself, he passed it with great flying colors. Now, as a result of that, it's a great example for a lot of the young guys coming up as well. I saw this clip of these two kids in England fighting at an MMA event. I believe it was an amateur event. Both of these kids had rash guards, and I believe it was a type of MMA fight where you were only hitting to the body instead of the head. And as a result of that, well, I guess you could call that a pancration fight, right? So that kid was holding his hand like a gun in the same way that Leon Edwards had. Now, that kind of gives Leon Edwards a little bit of a flair to his personality, right? As kind of showing that, like, I don't know, I guess I'm going to be a headshot banger in that ring, in that cage, which he has proven time and time again. Even in the Colby fight, he's done that. Even though he didn't knock out Colby, guess what? He also proved that he is one of the best head kickers in MMA in the current moment of space. Right? We got to appreciate guys like that because there is a little bit of a flair to them. It's just not the kind of flair that the casuals are looking for. And what the casuals are looking for are the bad boys of the sport. And as long as you are the bad boy of the sport, you're going to be able to garner attention in a very negative way because, unfortunately, that is the only way that you're going to pass the hardcores and into the casual fan base. That's really the most honest take that you can understand from that subject. Now, are there guys that are going to get lucky by, let's say, allowing themselves to be the quiet guy, allowing themselves to let their work do the talking? You know what? It could be lucrative for Tom Aspinall later down the line, right? After all, yes, he is humble, but he is English. He's not a trash talker, but he is a great fighter. And like Michael Bisping said, he could go on to become a long-time heavyweight champion, defended multiple times, and go down as the greatest ever. But at the same time, you got to understand one thing about Tom Aspinall, is that if he does reach the top of, let's say, the Ronaldos and the Conor McGregors of the world, it will be by sheer luck or a combination of things that, let's say, Khabib had gone through. A tenacious fight with a fearsome reputation on the line, with religious insults and cultural banter. All of those became very dangerous, but lucrative, because people like dangerous. People love watching a live action movie. UFC 229 was literally watching a live Lethal Weapon take place in front of you. But nonetheless, copycat crimes. Look at Khabib. The same thing happened. He went out and stomped Dylan Dennis on his head, and guess what? Dylan Dennis got stomped on his head again after the Logan Paul fight. So understand that there are consequences to your actions. But not only that, there are consequences that lead to a lucrative path. And that is one of the things you really have to understand about this subject of copycat crimes that are going on in the UFC. So, don't forget to copy this, share, like, and subscribe. And don't forget to tell a friend to tell a friend. And that is the way to share it. And like and subscribe so that I can drop you some hot MMA content, giving you different perspectives of the MMA world and the world outside of it as you watch these fights on a Saturday and reflect on them during the week. Those are one of the most beautiful things that I love to do about MMA content, which is what I'm going to do right now, a little bit of a bonus content. I love to be able to make MMA content based on the fact that I can reflect on a great moment that happened on a Saturday night and think about Leon Edwards going through all these tenacious promotions, his father being used as entertainment, all with the tragedy that has happened in his life, and now rising above it in such a positive way. In a world that is full of copycat criminals in the world of MMA, that's really the best way to say it, is a lot of these guys are copycat criminals. They see that one guy committing a certain crime is lucrative, and they decide, you know what, I'm going to capitalize on this in my next fight. But at the same time, when the fights are done on a Saturday night, when the ESPN crew start leaving the T-Mobile Arena, and all the people in the concessions that are cleaning, that were selling the popcorn and all the concessions, when all of that is said and done and all the fighters are home with their families and Dana White is back in his mansion in Vegas reflecting upon the New Year's and the holidays, you just have your whole life to reflect upon what had happened with these guys. And in what way? Well, you got to ask yourself, do you want a copycat crime, all the negativity that is out there in the world, or do you want to be like Leon and have a positive spin to not only your technique and the work that you did in the cage, but also a clean heart of approaching somebody that has such visceral hate? Maybe not that far, but a guy that is willing to stoop low in order to garner attention. And then during the weeks, you reflect upon yourself thinking, is this ethical? Is this correct? Is this the best way to do business by screwing this person over? Or is it better business to, let's say, give a fair share? And not only that, do everything with pure justice and by the book with no shenanigans and full transparency? Or do you want to go to scumbag route? Those are some of the most beautiful things that you can reflect upon these events. And Leon Edwards, as he is leaving Las Vegas on a Sunday night, going on a jet or in a commercial plane, probably first class, no less, back to Birmingham, England, now back in the foggy dew of things, he thinks to himself, man, you know what? I did it. Not only with a clean technique, but a clean heart. And now the world can look at it in inspiration like myself and say, you know what, man, think about Leon. Think about all the negativity that he had to go through. And then for him to go and rise above it and use great positivity to not only win the fight, but perhaps maybe even win the hearts and the minds of the people in the cage side and maybe even Donald Trump himself. What a great moment to fight in front of the president. And not only that, for Leon to avenge his father's death by somebody saying such heinous things. And it's always great that we can celebrate somebody like Tom Aspinall, somebody like Leon Edwards, somebody that can be humble and not fall into the copycat crimes of these predecessors before them, with the likes of Conor McGregor, Colby Covington, and maybe even Henry Cejudo. But some can say that Henry Cejudo does it tongue-in-cheek, but either way, you got to understand he can be very offensive to his opponents. But we also got to ask ourselves, isn't that what we signed up for? Knowing that we're going to take on some of the biggest scumbags in the world and potentially lose ourselves in a process. Or maybe strengthen our minds and our spirit through adversity. Those are some of the most beautiful things you can reflect on all throughout the week. So now with Colby Covington, I think he has a good self-realization of understanding that he can only beat the Wonderboy Thompsons of the world. And at some point, he is going to retire. And not only retire, he is going to tell the world that, you know what, all along I was just a character. And he's doing that already right now. But he needed to double down on Leon Edwards in order to get an edge over him, knowing that the range of the striking was going to be a problem, and the takedown defense of Leon was always there. The wrestling and the takedown prowess of Leon, taking it to the ground himself while using MMA combinations with kickboxing and then transitioning into level changes into wrestling, was effective towards Colby. He started saying to himself, you know what? I can win this fight at ease just by doing this, because at any time Colby can also be very dangerous. But it is Leon who's been the active champion, and it is Colby who's been out for a long time due to the politics of being such a high-profile fighter like himself. And you can argue a lot of these guys that are not high-profile are getting the best end of the stick because of the fact that they can fight often. And while fighting often, they're developing their skills to have longevity, with the likes of Jim Miller comes to mind, among others that are able to fight, multiple times and learn from them, with the likes of Dustin Poirier. He was able to get a lot of fights during the pandemic and after the pandemic, and that's why when he was able to clash with Conor McGregor, he had no chance because of the ring rust that was going on. And Dustin Poirier was number 4 and number 3 at the time, fresh off of fighting Khabib and then fighting off of Dan Hooker. So these are some of the problems that you run into as a high-profile fighter. You run into the issues of getting your contracts negotiated on time. And not only that, a lot of opponents are going to be asking for different bonuses, different checks, because of the fact that you are the superstar that is life-changing money. It's just a headache. But in turn, it is your skills that diminish. And as a result, you got to ask yourself, is it really worth it to sell out and become this copycat criminal fighter that can no longer get a fight because of the attraction that I garner is so big that every fight has to have some sort of boxing, long period of time negotiations in order to set the terms correctly for both parties type of thing. Those are the problems that you run into. And in turn, once again, your skills diminish as a result. And you got to ask yourself, is that a life that you want to lead? Because There's only two ways to lead as a mixed martial arts fighter. There's very few people that were ever able to live two lives in terms of being a full-time martial artist and entertainer. Very few people. And it often never works out. Okay? So you got to pick. Do you want to be an entertainer fighter, or do you want to be a real fighter like Leon Edwards? Now, if Leon Edwards was to go fight Ufc'S or Belal Muhammad, it would be very hard to match him up in terms of getting $1 million fight. Because, let's just be honest, Belal or Ufc'S, they are not the biggest talkers in the world. I love it. Of course, Belal Muhammad, Palestinian guy, getting a title shot, Ufc'S getting a title shot, another Muslim brother. Why not? But the problem is, I'm realistic in knowing that they are not pay-per-view draws. And as a result, they will have serious problems in terms of getting their contracts negotiated into a Leon Edwards title fight. But at the same time, it is only Leon Edwards that decides the realistic outcome of, let's say, the numbers that he's going to do without the Colby Covingtons, the Usmans, and the Conor McGregors of the world. If he doesn't have those types of opponents, he's not going to have $1 million type of fight. And is he going to be okay with that? I think he would be. Only to the result of knowing or thinking in his mind that he can defend his title multiple times and, well, cash out as a result afterwards. Or get another big money fight. Wait for another big money fight. That is what Leon Edwards has in the horizon. So, it's a very respectable life. It's not a problem to live that way. And on top of that, you also got to understand, in the UK, certain things may not be all that expensive in Birmingham as it would be if, let's say, you lived in New York or Harlem or Manhattan or LA, Santa Monica, or all these places that are very expensive in the real estate. But nevertheless, you got to understand, those are the only two choices that you have as a fighter. And guess what? Sometimes there is no shame in honor. So don't forget to like and subscribe, because that's the most honorable thing to do in this current moment of time right now. And don't forget to watch all the way till the end and watch all the other videos as well. Ciao.